I'm talking about a plan, the plan is everything, including the actual, the drawn plan, but also all the lists as well. So without any further waiting around, forest garden definition.
Jay,
yeah.
we're not seeing your slides at the moment.
Oh, sorry. I need to press the share screen. Dump. There we go. Okay. Yeah. Is that
Lovely.
okay?
Yeah.
Yep. Good. Okay. So sorry about the lack of slides. This is a picture of our first forest garden with a chalk circle, just showing how you can mark out the diameter of a tree. And these are the 4 points that I went through earlier on without my slideshow showing. Okay, so forest garden definition. As everybody, I am sure, has a copy of this book, which I kind of keep returning to and have it by my bedside and read it every day. The subtitle is Working with Nature to Grow Edible Crops. And for me, this is Martin Crawford's book, Creating a Forest Garden. And for me, this book is like the one, if you're going to get one book, this is the book you should get. And that also sums it up as well about forest garden. It's working with nature. What you're actually doing is creating an ecosystem to be able to support the growing, to be able to support the growing of productive crops. And it's you're letting nature do the work. Nature's doing the heavy lifting behind it. So, 4-year-old just coming in. Excuse me a second. Okay. Yeah, you go ahead. Okay. 1 second. I couldn't have time. You go to toilet. Tell Archie. There we go. Okay. I didn't plan that. So we're working with nature to grow edible crops, and what underpins it for me is it's about creating an ecosystem. So it is working with nature, and you are growing native plants where possible within a forest garden because you want to create that ecosystem. And the other kind of characteristics is it's emulating the woodland edge, and you're using perennials like trees and permanent ground cover. And this is like one particular take on the definition for a forest garden. And this is a photograph from Martin Crawford's forest garden down in Devon. And I think that's really, really important thing to do, is to keep returning to that as a design principle, is that you're creating an ecosystem. It's not just a garden. It's not just a vegetable garden. It's an ecosystem. So what is design? I'm going to move on here. Crudely put, design is purposefully putting things in the right place. And design is a tool. There is, you could talk about it for years, make a whole career out of it, but it's a tool, and people can use design for good or for evil. I just found out the other day that, that IBM built the punch cards for the Nazis in the 1930s. So they designed a whole system. It's amoral. What you actually need to have is a wider context. It requires a wider context to put design into to be able to use it. And I think this is what forest gardening does so successfully. The wider context is nature, is supporting ecosystems. So it fits in really well. And the other thing, on a kind of individual level, every one of you will have a garden that is so different in so many different ways from everybody else's garden. And there are so many variables. What it comes down to is arranging the elements within a garden, but there are just so many different variables that it's just seeing what you have and then arranging them the best that you can. So the kind of, forest garden design then is about working with nature. It means that you're designing for nature, that you are bearing this in mind at every kind of step along the way. I have become increasingly interested in the wildlife aspect of forest gardening as well, because they are so closely intertwined. And as part of that is growing native plants. And I can highly recommend, this is a book I always recommend. There's a book called A New Garden Ethic by a chap called Benjamin Vogt, North American. He's a prairie gardener, and he's more of an ornamental gardener, but some of the issues he talks about are absolutely essential across the board. And first and foremost, really, it's about human supremacy and not treating plants as objects, and actually treating plants as as living things, as part of a wider ecosystem. So for your forest garden plan, really, you've got to ask yourself, what's the point of making a plan? I do know people who have started forest gardens by just planting stuff and say, oh, we'll have a tree here and a tree there, and they chuck everything together, and it's a bit of a mess, and the trees grow and they're too close together, and then more work needs to be done to thin them out. So the whole reason for having a plan is so that you're making you make big mistakes earlier on, but not out in the garden. Yep. So you sort your ideas about what you want and where you want it, and you play around with ideas, and then you put the ideas into action. So a really, really useful way of doing this is to write a list. I'm an inveterate list writer, and I write lists about everything. But it's actually really, really useful. I have found this for forest gardening is to write down lists of everything that you can think of. And in some ways, the planning stage, there's a real beauty to it. There's a real sense of excitement, because it can be anything. You can think of anything, and it's all in your imagination. I mean, each of the other stages when you come to creating a forest garden also have their own magic as well. But there's something about looking at a list of plants and saying, wow, we could plant any of these. So what I would say then is, the other reason for writing this stuff down is that you will forget it. Like how you think you will remember a plant that you put into a pot without writing a label. You go, yeah, I'll remember that's such and such a plant. And invariably you will forget. A plan, in the same way, will communicate these ideas to others if you're working with other people and living with other people, but also it will communicate these ideas to your future self. So in a year's time, you go, why on earth did I do such and such? Why did I want to have a tree there? You go, oh yes, that's why. So kind of really useful thing to have. There's a couple of different tools. I mean, you can use pen and paper. There's I think I got it written down later on. Yeah, there's a really handy tool for the computer for note taking. There's one called Simple Note. It's in the note. It's at the end of the seminar, but that's worth having a look at, just to write a simple list of stuff, and you can create notes easily as well. And as a special extra bonus for attendees of this seminar, I've made a planning checklist, because it's a checklist to beat all checklists, and you can download it as a PDF. And here I have, although I can't see myself, it's a list of stuff, but it's got a checklist, and you can see the different sections. So all the stuff that I'm talking about today is all in this PDF. It's 4 sides of A4, the big gaps in it for you to write things down on as well, and then a couple of references at the bottom too. So all the things I'm going to talk about for the planning checklist, they're all on this PDF. Okay. Okay, so the thing to bear in mind as well is that there is a lot of stuff. There is an awful lot of things to kind of consider, and in some respects, it's a lot to get your head around about all the things that you should survey, and the features that you should think about, and the plants that you want, and how to organize your pictures, and how to start the plan. But just go work through them. Just work through them bit by bit, and the survey is so important. One thing I would say is, whatever garden you're planning, is to give it a bit of time. Don't jump in straight away. There's no need to do everything up front. Give it a bit of time and have a think about where you want the main elements in the garden. Yep. So don't just jump in, buy a load of plants, plant them out. Do have a think about them first of all. I mean, you give yourself a few months to settle in, to see where things are, to see how the weather is, to see the garden as it is throughout the seasons. So there's no rush. There's no kind of rush to jump in. And actually, doing a survey, having a checklist does slow you down because you need to spend that time making observations of things. So first of all, survey. Yeah, survey. Oh, okay. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Sorry. So the survey, there are 5 different elements to it. There's the position of the land, the elements on the land, on the plot, the features that exist already, and the situation of the land, how the land sits in the landscape, and then as you yourself and how you sit within the land and what your setup is. So I'll just quickly go through these. I'm not going to have time to talk about them in any kind of great detail, but I'll just give a quick list through. So number 1, surveying the position. So you need to know what orientation your land is, and that simply means where does the land point in terms of the compass. So you've got most people will have a compass on their phone. Use that and it will tell you which direction the land is facing, and that really has a big determination upon the type of plants that you're growing, but also where you're getting the weather from and where the sun is as well. The other thing to look at is the elevation, how high up you are, and that will determine the weather and the climate. And finally, the slope. If there's a slope on the land, that has a big bearing as well. If you're north facing and you're on a slope, you're going to get significantly less sunshine, whereas if you're south facing, you get more sunshine. If you're south facing on a slope, you're going to get even more sunshine, to put it crudely. So you need to work out your orientation, your elevation, and the slope. The elements, these are the elements of the water, earth, wind, water, and fire, the sun. So you need to make a note of where the water flows on your land and how much rainfall you have, and if there is any kind of permanent running water in the winter, if there are any damp patches in the summer, if there's any damp patches, if you have what do they call it? There's the river that comes up. Oh, I can't remember the name. Oh, what was that?
Spring.
No. It's an English word, and it's for winterborn. So in the winter, yeah, you have it's a stream which comes up it's a stream that comes up in the winter time. So that kind of stuff, need to kind of know where the water is, so you don't plant. You're putting plants in the right place, and how much soil, how much water's in the soil as well. And related to that is the earth. This is a photograph from the forest garden last summer, and it was really, really dry, as you can see from the photograph. But the earth is a major contributing factor, the geology of it, but also the acidity of it, how dry it gets, and what type of soil it is. It's like doing soil tests for it to see what type of soil you have, because obviously plants grow in soil, so it's a major factor in it. Next one is wind. Where's the prevailing wind? You can find this out you can ask around, or you can just experience it yourself. We have southwesterlies where we are, and you kind of need to grow windbreaks to break. You need to have windbreaks to soften the effect of the wind. And then sun, is working out the position of the sun in the sky. Oh dear, yeah. Okay. So, and then finally climate, which is like overall over the whole year. So we're looking at features now. Very quickly, features are existing plants, Existing utilities, really, really important. Existing plants will actually tell you what kind of plants will grow there and will give you an indication of what the soil is like and what you can grow. Utilities are really, really important. This is a photograph of some swallows on a telephone line. Utilities are really important because you want to make sure you're not planting trees underneath a power line or a telephone line, and you're not planting trees on top of a sewage pipe, for example. So you need to know where your utilities are and map them out and make sure you're not planting anything that's going to get in the way. And finally, structures, existing structures. A favorite is finding a concrete, the concrete foundations of an old greenhouse or something. You're not even aware that it's there, but this is the kind of stuff you need to find out. And finally, access, public footpaths, and where the existing gates are. If you need to consider putting in another gate, that's kind of critical as well. And finally, the situation. Whereabouts you are. We're out in West Wales, so we're out in West Wales, and we get a lot of what's stuff called slurry, cow poo and water sprayed on the fields. We've got some going on next door as we speak. Actually, it's delightful. So you need to think about where you are, where your neighbours are, how close they are. If there's a problem with noise, a problem with the privacy, any kind of issues around slurry. So your place in the landscape and how you fit in, and this can alter your plans as well. And finally, I envisage you as a medlar flower blossom, and this is the household setup. And it really is important to think. I know we're talking about forest gardening as an ecosystem, but people need to be able to fit into that ecosystem as well. So it's who's in the household, and what do different people want in the household, and what's the setup? And have you got toddlers? Have you got teenagers? Has everyone left home? What's the kind of situation? This will kind of determine how you design things, how much energy you've got, how much how much knowledge you have, how much time you've got, and your other kind of resources like money and other things like that. So all these you need to be aware of before starting a forest garden, because a forest garden is low maintenance, but only when it's established. It's quite a lot of work to set up and does take up quite a lot of time and resources. So secondly, features, and this bit, there's a big blank page in your checklist, and you write a list of everything that you want. I've got a friend of mine who was doing some work for a next door neighbor, and he said, I put all this stuff down that I want. I went, no, that's brilliant. That's a really, really good thing to do. Write down everything you think you could want. Yeah. And it's much, much easier. It's better to cross it off the list later than it is to think, if only I had thought of. Yep. So however bizarre or outlandish it might seem, write everything down on a list. So I've just got a couple of examples: polytunnel, greenhouse, raised beds, wildlife pond, wildflower meadow, that kind of thing. Just think about all the things that you could like: football pitches, basketball hoop. Yep, it's everything that's in the garden and how it can fit together. Because it is worth bearing in mind as well that a forest garden doesn't have to be exclusively a forest garden. It can integrate. That's the beauty of it, is that it can integrate into other gardens as well, into an existing garden or into existing uses. Yeah. So forest gardening is much more about the idea of growing an ecosystem and of growing it in layers than it is about it has to be a set space or it has to be a set size. Next up is plants. Make a list of plants. I mean, I've got a list of the plants that I started out with, and it's great. I've still got it, and it's quite funny. There's hundreds of plants. I write them all down and say, I want one of these and one of those. Fantastic resource for this, which I'm sure a lot of people will be aware of, is the Plants for a Future website, and it's great. Lists loads and loads of information. Fantastic, brilliant resource. Number one go-to website for plants relating to forest garden. And secondly, RHS Plant Finder. They do have a lot of there's a lot of additional information, and the very nice thing is there's a native filter, which means you can filter out all the native plants on their database. which is super handy. It's really good to be able to find out native plants. And then think about when you're designing. The beauty of designing a kind of designing with nature in mind is that wildflowers fit perfectly into a forest garden. And then the whole kind of ornamental aspect, as well as the edible aspect and the useful aspect, is it's all got a function. Think about native wildflowers as well, and you can use them ornamentally. We have some Aquilegia columbine, purple flower, it's out in flower at the moment, and some red campion growing together kind of by accident, but they look fantastic, kind of pink and purple. So think about native wildflowers. Next up is pictures. And I just say, I think it's a really good idea, particularly when you're starting out planning your garden, is to think about what you want. And it really helps to visualize it, to say, this is the kind of thing, this is the tree, or the pond, or and actually, if you have a picture, it helps to focus the mind. It really does. And it helps to go, yep, that's kind of what we're going with. And that makes a lot of sense. I've got a bit of an 80s slogan going on there: inspiration, motivation, aspiration. There's not a sarcastic emoji, but it does actually make a big difference to be able to get all your pictures, print them out, put them on your walls. I've got photographs on my walls of different plants and sketches and things. And there's Pinterest as well, website which I'm sure you're aware of, which is really good for collecting images together and sharing them with other people. And finally is the map. The map is not the territory. The map is a tool, like the plan. The map, the kind of key things for the map is to mark important features. So your utilities and your footpaths and your tree, your kind of major structural stuff, the trees, and where everything is going and how it fits together. It doesn't have to be fancy. It can be. I'm going to go off piece a second. Oh, I've got my just a sketch. I don't know if any you probably can't see that. It's just like 5 mil squared graph paper with a sketch on and a measurement for the outline of a garden. And it can be really simple. And it can't, so long as it's approximate, it doesn't have to be spot on. The most important thing is to, once you've measured a map, is to go and then measure again later on out on the ground. Every single map that I've made, every single kind of visual plan, has always been a few meters out. It's never spot on. It's always, you've got to do a bit of thinking on the ground. So always measure out outside first of all before putting stuff in, see if they fit. Yeah, so I hope that makes sense.
5-minute warning.
5-minute warning. Okay. Design guide. Just going to go on to, this is the final part then. So you have your checklist and you've got lots of lists of all the plants and the features and your situation and the survey all done. And now I just want to talk about kind of 4 key kind of design principles, design guides. So first off is zoning, thinking about the house, where you work out from the house, and then you keep the highest maintenance, most used kind of plants. So for example, herbs or leafy vegetables like spinach type plants, you keep them nearest the house, or the kind of valuable stuff like cherries that you want to be able to run out and scare the birds away from your cherry crop, but keep the most used nearest and the highest maintenance nearest, and then do a bit, but work out and work your way out. What I would suggest doing is this going to work? Yeah, is to divide the land up, divide the garden up into different areas, and it helps to kind of simplify the process, and then concentrate on one area and then move on to the next area when you're kind of planning it and when you're creating the forest garden as well. And think of paths and functions, and think about again how the space is going to be used and how the bits fit together. Yep, and this goes for every single garden, no matter how small, no matter how apparently simple. You know, where you're hanging up the washing, where the kid's going to play football, where you're going to put the nut tree. So yeah, think about zoning, and Secondly is putting the right plant in the right place. You really, you need to think about, final, yeah, that's final size. You need to think about the plant size. This is a great Solomon seal, by the way, which I've got in the garden in a part shade bit of the forest garden. You need to think about the final size of the plant, how big it will grow to eventually, with the diameter and the height, how much sun it requires, whether it's full sun, part sun, the type of soil it needs, and think about whether it's a native plant as well. But get the right plant in the right place, and if it's happy, it will grow really, really well. Most plants, but yeah, plants want to live, is the bottom line. Tree spacing is the other kind of key design thing. Make sure that you have enough space between trees. This is 1/4 to 1/2 of the average diameter. So when you're putting out the plan, make sure you've got enough space between the trees. And protection is the last one. You need to protect the garden with windbreaks, ultimately windbreaks. In the meantime, you can use nurse trees, which are like small shelters for tender plants, and dead hedges, which is what you can see in the image. It's just like a load of branches put between bigger branches. And then finally, my favorite tools is 2-3 meter bit of bamboo, and this is for quickly measuring out in the garden. Secondly is string and bamboo. I've got one here I made earlier. This isn't the actual real one, and use that to draw the circles around that I showed you earlier on when you're measuring out the garden. And then a measuring tape, which is a surveyor's measuring tape, which costs about £10, which is invaluable as well for measuring up the garden. Okay, and remember, measure twice, plant once. So at the end of that, just want to say, write it all down, get it all down on paper, or however your list takes shape, and make the big mistakes early on. Make the big mistakes early on paper. Don't make them out in the garden and then kick yourself 5 years later. And finally, unlike what I'm doing now, take your time. Okay, that is it. So there we go, the end. That's my email and that's my newsletter sign up. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jake.
Cool, blimey. Is that too fast?
No, would you be able to stop sharing your screen?
Yeah. There we go.
So we've got a massive turnout tonight of about 90 odd people, which is extraordinary. We hope you're getting something from this. Just a couple of things to note. Jake's presentation and this recording will be available afterwards for people to watch again and to download those resources, that PDF that Jake was featuring in his presentation. So we thought we'd put you into random breakout groups just to have a little natter and a kind of reflection really on what you've heard, and to sharpen any questions that you might have, only for a few minutes. If you are having problems with your internet connection or with your sound technologically in any way, just don't accept the breakout and you'll stay in the main room. But otherwise, I will now do that for a few minutes or so. And you'll get a warning, about a minute's warning, telling you that you'll be brought back into the main room. But the thing to always remember about these things is, we don't know the people that we're going to be in the breakout room with. Just remember to share the time and to give each other space and to develop their thinking as well. So enjoy it, and we'll see you back in a few minutes. Hannah, sorry.
Did we give sort of guidance around the breakout room?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Go ahead.
So something that we were considering was whether, as a stimulus, which you don't have to talk about, but just as a thought, of how you have or could apply the kind of principles and practices that you've just heard in your own space, or maybe in a communal forest garden, or in a garden that you're involved in. So just some stimulus in case.
Great, thanks, Hannah. So I shall do that now. Hello there. Has everyone got their unmuted? Hello, Ruth. Hello, I'm Paul. I think you might be on mute, Ruth, so you might need to unmute yourself. There's a button at the bottom left of your screen. No? Oh, here we are.
Ah.
Okay.
Yeah. So.
Very good.
Yes. Right.
Breakout room.
Yes.
Join.
Technical assistance.
Join breakout room.
Join.
Hello. So, what are you making of what you've heard? Hello, James.
Oh, hello.
Hello. Hello. We seem to, we were being joined. Oh, there's Graham. Okay. What surfaced for you as a question from what Jake was presenting there in terms of your own garden or your own planning for a garden?
Yeah, I suppose spacing of trees is an interesting one. I guess, yeah, the temptation to, because at the moment in our garden, the trees are very small and there's very little shade. So sort of sitting out and you're thinking, gosh, this is blazing sunlight all the time, but aware that you want trees to cover that over, but planting too close and having them sort of,
Yeah.
so it's tough really.
Did a question come from that, or are you just accepting that's how it is?
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about the fruit trees, sort of how well they can do when they're sort of overshadowed, really, sort of apples and pears, whether they need lots of sunlight, whether they will cope under a sort of, you know, partially shaded canopy sort of situation.
Yeah, in my experience, usually they need quite a bit of sun. But yeah, it'd be good to ask Jake and others who are in the group who know quite a lot more, you know, who've been doing this for 20 or 30 years. We could see what other intelligence there is around that could help with that question.
Yeah.
Hello, Graham. I think you were there last week, weren't you, as well? I think you're muted. Hang on, let me unmute you.
Yes, I was. Yes, with Thomas. Yes, I think I'm very early stage with this and really thinking, doing the 100 hours thinking bit. And I think my main interest is to try and source native plants. And I'm not really a plantsman.
Right. Oh, sourcing them. Oh, I see.
Well, knowing what to plant.
Right.
And being able to source native ones, yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things we want to do on our website is, we'll do that within the next couple of weeks, is launch something called a forest garden in a box that gets you started off with a guild. The guild actually that Thomas presented last week, with some variations to it and some sources, some nurseries that actually do these things.
That'll be really good.
Actually.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Some practical resources available pretty soon, I think, on the website. Anything you thought of asking Jake about on the design side of things?
No, not really. It's all fairly clear. I have a base map. The first thing I've done is my base map. No, it was clear to me. It was clear to me.
Okay.
I'd be interested in the checklist.
Yes. Well, he'll have that as a download, so that could be good. Hello, we've been joined by someone. How do we say your name? Hello there. How do you pronounce that name? A-O-I-F-E. I'm afraid I don't know how to pronounce it.
Aoife.
Oh, Aoife. Okay. Aoife, hello. Is that Irish?
Yeah, I'm from Cork in Ireland.
All right, welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I don't know whether you heard anything of our conversation, but we're just kind of, you know, banding around our situation and what questions might come up for Jake that we'd like to have answered.
Yeah, I was just trying to think of some questions for him here, actually.
Right. And what's your situation over in Cork? Have you already got a forest garden?
Well, I planted some trees in February, like 200 native trees. So I'm hoping to kind of add to that, but maybe I should have made my list beforehand. But yeah, maybe it's interesting to see what I can do from now. Like I was quite happy at how it turned out and the situation, and we've added some raspberry trees and stuff like this.
Right.
But yeah, it's kind of interesting to see maybe what I should have written on paper first.
Well, you know, there's always
yeah,
pause, isn't there, before the next bout of planting?
yeah, I kind of got a little bit excited with my 200 trees maybe, but we'll see what happens.
Well, good luck with that.
Yeah, thank you.
The question to Jake is, what can I undo?
Yeah. When can I replant all these trees?
Will it be too much of a shock if I uproot half of them?
Yeah.
Hmm.
Maybe not, maybe not.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to just close the rooms now so that we get back in a minute or so to the main room, so that we've got time to have a bit of a kind of question and answer session with Jake. Just to let us know that that's going to happen. Oh, someone else joined us. Hello, Matt.
Yeah, just coming back.
Oh, you were just coming back?
Me and Stuart were together in a room.
Oh, right. Okay. So people are just coming back now. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So I think people are just coming back together. Hannah, as people come back, have you been able to gather a few questions from the chat that seem to be emerging, and indeed things from your own breakout, which are coming up as questions?
To be fair, there haven't been so many questions in the chat, more people commenting and sharing things, or if questions have come up, they've mostly been answered. So no, but maybe people will come back from the breakout.
Yeah. I think, James, you had a question, didn't you, about fruit trees? Did you want to put that one?
Yeah, just wondering whether people got experience of trying to grow fruit trees in partial shades, and if so, if they found any fruit trees will produce fruit in partial shade situations.
Yeah, a lot of the dogwoods will.
Grow black currants. They'll grow.
Yeah, black currants.
Yeah.
Red currants. In terms of trees, they're most of the dogwoods, so cornus masses and things like that.
Hadn't thought of that. Thank you. Yeah.
Do we have Jake back? Jake, are you back?
I'm here.
Yeah.
You are here. Great.
Amazing. Yeah. Are you down there?
Yes. Yes, Hannah's down there.
Where's it?
Yeah, I get confused about these things.
Yeah. So Jake's obviously willing to take any questions on the design, and you know, to honour the experience and expertise that's in this enormous group of people that we've never had the size of before tonight. Plenty of you, I'm sure, have many years, indeed decades of experience. So don't hold back in sharing it. You know, let's make this as fluent a conversation as possible. So can we go to our next question?
Yeah, we've got a question in the chat from Sophie about strategies for protecting fruit trees from late frosts. Unless she wants to add to that, or they want to add to that.
Who's this?
So protecting fruit trees from late frosts. Anyone else?
Jake, do you want to share any strategies?
Fleece. But it depends on the size of the fruit tree, obviously. Yeah, we've that's about the only thing I can think of. We had an Asian pear which has been really badly damaged this year. I didn't get around to fleecing it, But yes, and then that's about it. Yeah, I can't think of anything else. I would like to know.
Does anyone else have any experience about protecting trees from frost? I mean, there's the old tradition of wassailing, right? Beating the apple trees.
Well, that's a good
I'm
one.
not sure.
That's an excuse to
I'm
get
not
drunk, I thought.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Never mind the flowers. Let's have a...
Yeah, the cider keeps them warm.
Okay, so I could ask a question to Jake, which is, what would you think is, or to anyone, what is the most common mistake? Because you kept saying, make mistakes on maps, not in the garden. So what is the most common mistake that happens in people who are designing gardens for the first time that people should watch out for?
The right size of the tree, get the right size tree in the right place, the diameter of the tree. You need to know how big the plant will grow to. For me, this is something I've come across quite a few times. If you're growing a fruit tree, you need to know the root stock, because the root stock will determine the height and the diameter and the vigor of the tree. And you need to get the right root stock for your situation. Yeah. And too often I've seen trees and bushes planted too close together. And the same goes for shrubs. And there's an Elaeagnus abingii for a chap I did some work for up the road, and it's planted right next to a rose. It's about 1 meter away, and it's a 5-meter bush. So, you know, it's that kind of thing, I'd say.
Okay, so there's quite a few questions in the chat now. So I'll give you, so we've got, are there any planting strategies to alter microclimates other than more or less shade? With a few answers around planting shelter trees or planting on the windy side, considering that. Also wondering about underplanting fruit trees versus the traditional gardening idea that they should be clear at the base for competition. And finally, for this round of questions, is it better to really be strict about planting natives, or to plant all sorts of things to increase diversity for like functions that you want? So those are 3 questions for now. There's actually more. So.
Okay. What were they again? Oh, hold on. The last one, I'll work my way backwards because that's how my memory works. I think there is actually room in most gardens. There will be space for natives, and I think it comes down to there will be sometimes, like you're planting a sweet chestnut, for example. There isn't it's a non-native, I think introduced by the Romans, but then it's, you know, then there will be space in a windbreak for a Gelder rose rather than an autumn olive, for example. So there's always going to be space somewhere you can put natives. So I think, yeah, don't beat yourself up about it, but be aware of it. And if you have the opportunity to grow natives, then grow natives. And also, it's not just the big, you know, it's the bigger plants. It's also the ground cover plants. We have got ground ivy here in West Wales, which grows really, really well. So I've used it extensively rather than, I don't know, like a Chilean strawberry, for example. And I'd rather use that because that supports more wildlife. But there's always space, I find, to do both. What was the other one?
Underplanting and under fruit trees.
I'm not an expert on underplanting trees, but I do understand that. From what I understand, the root structure. I underplant my fruit trees. I have a clump of comfrey by each fruit tree, and then chop and drop a couple of times a year to provide nutrients for it. And the root structure of comfrey is very different to the root structure of a tree. It's far, the tree is far more horizontal, and the comfrey goes straight down. So the roots aren't actually competing. There is a fantastic book about trees and how tree roots work, and I can't for the life of me remember it, but it's fascinating that the feeding roots are actually apparently around the circumference of the edge of the tree. So when you are putting a mulch down, you should put it in a donut shape around the drip line of the tree rather than at the base of the tree, because the feeding roots are further out, and toward the surface as well. So I'll dig out a reference for that book as well.
There's a book called by Robert Couric on roots demystified, which covers all of that.
Yes.
Fantastic book.
Oh, I haven't read it. Oh, I want to get hold of a copy. Oh.
Roots Demystified, Robert Couric.
Brilliant, thank you.
His other book is also an absolute masterpiece on, it's called Creating Edible Landscapes Naturally.
Ah, wow.
Creating Edible Landscapes Naturally.
Brilliant, thank you.
And when someone was asking about rootstocks, it covers all the different types of rootstocks, which one, how to choose the right rootstock for different types, how to, basically how to select the right rootstock for your soil, and then what scion you then add. And in a couple of weeks' time, I'm going to be doing a session on ground cover. So we will cover what to plant underneath trees in detail in a couple of weeks' time.
Thank you, Rakesh. That's great. There's an assumption here that we kind of that we're not going to make the mistakes because we're getting all this great advice. What if we've actually got going planting some trees and they're too damn close to each other? There was a person in my peer group, in my breakout group, who'd already got planting, and I mean, can you undo those sorts of mistakes?
Yeah, move the tree. Yeah. Which is hard work.
It's hard work, or you
could prune it.
Yeah, exactly. You could keep pruning it, but
Keep
then you're a slave to pruning it more or less for the rest of its life. It's your choice. The other mistake that I see people make, and if you look at a lot of the old forest gardens here in London in particular, the ones which were made 15, 20 years ago, as well as spacing, which I 100% agree is the most critical mistake. The other significant thing is very few people in those days used to think about the nutrient calculations, how to ensure there's enough nutrients cycling through the system to keep the fruit really fruiting well, which especially for the trees that really require a lot of nutrients is absolutely essential. And you absolutely rightfully said things like comfrey, because of its ability to mine potassium in particular. But then you're going to need to really think about nitrogen. Where does the nitrogen come from? And I've noticed a few people, I think James mentioned Eleagnus as a tree, as a shrub that actually can fruit in shade. That's also the #1 most fantastic nitrogen fixing tree stroke shrub. So it's a really useful one to get to know. And there's many. My favorite is probably wax myrtle, because you get wax from it, you get a berry from it, you get to eat the leaves. It smells absolutely divine. It's the most remarkable plant.
Nikki, are you trying to say something?
No.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I just wanted to make sure I could unmute you from this end if you couldn't yours.
No, I could unmute.
Okay.
I've got 2 people in the room with me that I'm chatting to.
Oh, a multitasking doctor.
So there's another specific question for Jake, which is one of the pictures from the slides was a view from above the plot, and it's just a question of whether whether you have a drone, Jake, to take that shot, whether you think it's worth using drones for mapping and surveying if you're doing it in like a kind of
I think I use Google Maps and Apple Maps and then take a screenshot, and then and that's how I do my plans. But I don't know about if it's worthwhile doing that, because that's a cheap way of doing it. And I've actually got I've got a couple of videos about how to do it. If you're comfortable using CAD, that's a simple way of getting a basic plan together just to get a general feel for it. But I don't know about if it's worth, if you're doing it professionally. I think if you're doing lots of sites, then I think maybe have a look at using drones. But I don't know how much I think they're like 500 quid for a decent drone, and you need a license. I got some friends back in Kent who fly drones, and they were supposed to be coming up this Easter to do some mapping for me, just as an experiment, because I thought that'd be quite a fun thing to do. But I don't think it's not on a small scale. If it's a smaller plot, then measuring physically is fine, and then if it's a larger plot, use a satellite and then back that up with physical measurements as well, is what I'd suggest.
Jake, would you say something about your own situation? I mean, for example, what was your intention in starting and planning your forest garden? Were you planning to create something big enough to sustain yourself from? And if so, was that how you went about the design?
No, it was total not knowing anything at all and just drawing up a list of plants and then thinking, seeing what will grow and then just sucking it and seeing it really. So yeah, there wasn't a kind of overarching plan. I do think it's a very interesting kind of this idea of self-sufficiency in a forest garden and how much you would actually need. I did some research about it and how useful that is for most people, or whether you're better off concentrating on for your staple, concentrating on a forest garden as sustenance in terms of your health and the getting fresh vegetables and the herbal side of it, and then relying upon other sources for your staple food. But you can do it, yes, absolutely. And we've kind of there will be enough food here to sustain us, but that wasn't the intention originally, no. But yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so we have just a couple of minutes left. We can probably squeeze one more question in. Hannah, I don't know whether there's anything more you're picking up from the chat.
There's quite a lot here about whether climate change has an impact on plant choices, how you might choose the right tree for your garden.
Yeah.
And there was a specific one about including blackberries or other acidic loving plants and sort of keeping the soil acid. But yeah, and then there's other questions about keeping the right nutrient balance, which was what Rakesh was talking about. I don't know. Those are the three things, but I don't know whether you have time to answer them. So,
climate change, I'd say diversity. There's a big discussion in native plant circles about people saying, we ought to have non-natives because they'll be more resilient to climate change. But you're forgetting that the role that native plants play in an ecosystem, and you want to have a resilient ecosystem. A forest garden is actually an ideal opportunity to try different non-native plants because, for example, autumn olives and sweet chestnuts and plants that are walnuts, plants that are non-native, which will probably do better with the climate change that we're forecast for. So yes, I think it's diversity is the key, but with a foundation in native. Yeah.
And that, I think, was the point Thomas was making in many different dimensions last week on his seminar about guilds. Really, it's kind of left now for us to say thank you to Jake. If you'd like to express your appreciation to him in some way. And thank you very much, Jake, for doing this. Just a reminder that you can. We will send you. Hannah will send you an email with the recording of this and your presentation, Jake, I think as well. Of course, with the PDF to download, so people have that as a resource. And we hope you will still engage with us in some form. We're a very small membership organisation. Anything that you might want to do to support us would be wonderful. So without further ado, I'll just hand back to Hannah to say a final goodbye.
Yeah, I don't have much more to add. Thanks for participating, everyone, and really putting really interesting things in the chat and answering each other and helping each other out, and yeah, making time. As Paul said, we're a membership organisation. Along with the recording, we'll circulate a link if you want to become a member, or if you want to follow us on Facebook, or if you want to follow us on Twitter, or if you want to give a donation for the content that you've been seeing. We're now making a dedicated page on our website for the recordings, so some point later we'll hopefully be able to make them all available on there, but that's a sort of ongoing project, so it's not going to be immediately, but you should get the recording from this specific one sooner in case you want it sooner. So yeah, but thanks very much. Sorry we didn't get so much chance for lots of people to contribute at the end of this. We ended up with more question time, but yeah.
And you will get a record of the chat along with the recording, so all those resources people have kindly shared will be part of the record, so rest assured. Okay, well, off to clap for our carers, I suppose. Nice to see you all, and maybe see some of you again.
Yes, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.